And we know that it's Friday morning, and hopefully you're looking forward to a really great weekend. So the slide that's in front of you, I know that we have some new people across the country, and we are just delighted always to make new friends and to make new connections. And so just so you know who this team of PSR Advanced Practice, Psychosocial Rehabilitation Advanced Practice is, the brainchild for this work was really Dr. John Higginbottom. So he's the founder of really these programs, and we're very grateful to him. We have Jordan Clark, who established this platform for us about 5 years ago. So thanks to Jordan. And we have two really amazing contractors with us, Manny, who's on the line, and Jen, who's here in the room with us, just both content experts around mental health practice. Manny, as you know, has recently published a book on trauma, and really amazing work for her to have done. And Jen is also one of our experts here on wellness recovery action planning, amongst other things. And so really great to have their expertise and their technical knowledge. So just so you know who you're working with this morning. And initially, this platform was funded by the Ministry of Health there in British Columbia. And we're very, very grateful to Douglas College for their continued support. In truth, we could not really do this work without the support of Douglas College. We're also enormously grateful to our presenters who do this work really for free. So there's no financial reward involved, but really people do this to advance the work and advance the knowledge. So we're very, very grateful to many of you who have presented over the years. So a big thank you to you. And our purpose is really, it's about transferring evidence-based knowledge to practice and just supporting the work of clinicians as best we can. So we're always so happy to hear from you. If you're interested in presenting, please do send us a line, as Susan did on this occasion. So very grateful for her for taking up the opportunity. As Douglas College staff, we wish to acknowledge the Coquitlam and Kikwa First Nations, as well as all Coast Salish peoples on whose traditional and unceded territory we live, learn, work, and play. And after the webinar, you will receive a link to just let us know how we're doing. We're very grateful for that feedback, and I promise you I look very closely at all that feedback. So your feedback really helps us improve, and we really do attend to what people say. So really lovely to hear from you. And I know sometimes with an online platform, it's not the most exciting thing to do at the end, but if we appreciate those 5 minutes, they really help us to be better at what we do. I just want to do a shout out to the Mental Health Commission, some great webinars on there as well. If this work is new to you, that you might be interested in just having a look at, and also interesting course on there around supporting people around suicide. And so that work is up and live until mid-April. So if you're interested, I definitely had a good look at that yesterday. Very helpful for us. And again, also PSR Canada, have a look if you have a moment to have a look at PSR competencies, and have a look at the website if this work is new to you. Yeah, so that's the online work that I mentioned. And a shout out actually to Ireland Health Authority, who very recently launched a recovery toolkit. So just kudos to them. They've done an amazing work thinking about, even for employees, thinking about how recovery oriented they are in terms of job descriptions, seeking new employees, looking at evaluation in the system, looking at processes for assessment and intervention and evaluation. So kudos to them. And if you're interested in getting in contact with them, I can certainly give you a link to a person who'd be willing to chat with you. But just really as a group of people who are really providing leadership around recovery-oriented systems, just want to give them a shout. Also, just because this is a presentation around family involvement, just to let you know that we are currently looking for some family members, loved ones, caregivers who might be able to give us some feedback for a CIHR and Michael Smith supported grant, helping us understand how to transform mental health services within housing specifically. So if you're out there, you happen to live in Vancouver, you happen to be a family member, a loved one of people who've received services from either Stories, Housing, or Pacific Coast Apartments in Vancouver. Love to hear from you. So just if you can, just please send Joseph an email. The details are in front of you, or just give him a phone call. So it's for loved ones or family members who are supporting people in housing in either Pacific Coast Apartments or in Stories. We're developing an implementation team, so willing to really work with people over a series of 12 weeks on an implementation team. So big commitment, 2 hours over 12 weeks, and that work is beginning in the next couple of weeks. So with no more further ado, I would really like to just provide a little bit of background. We know that supporting caregivers from the Mental Health Commission, and we know from our lives that it is really an important aspect of transformed mental health systems and care. And I'm sure that's a big reason that you're here today, learning and responding to the needs of caregivers in our mental health systems. And just if this work is a little bit new to you, this is an older study, 2002, but where we learned that 500,000 Canadians provide care for family members, friends, or neighbors living with a serious mental illness. So we know that so many people are giving much of their lives and their energy and their financial resources to people who are living with mental illness. And we know that as a transformed mental health service system, we need to be providing good support to those individuals. I know you probably know all this, but just to make that front and center that this is important work, and just providing that kind of support is essential in how we move forward. So it is my great pleasure to introduce our two speakers today. First person you'll hear from is Susan Inman, who's a mom of a daughter who's living with schizoaffective disorder for 18 years. And although once considered to have refractory psychotic disorder, her daughter recovered from psychosis. She's enjoyed years of stability despite living with ongoing difficulties of a severe mental illness. Susan has taught English and drama at Vancouver Secondary School for 25 years. She's the author of a memoir, After Her Brain Broke, and Helping My Daughter Recover Her Sanity. She also writes about mental illness policies, and I've known Susan through the years as being a strong advocate for people with mental illness and caregivers, and I happen to know that she's really contributed a great deal in the Vancouver area and the broader perspective around policies and making positive changes. So very, very grateful to having Susan with us this morning. Just want to do a caveat. I know Susan speaks at the end of her presentation about occupational therapy, and maybe you know that I'm an occupational therapist, so I just want to say to you that in terms of conflict, I promise I have not influenced that, but just to let you know that as we move forward. And also we're going to hear from Hardeep Thind, who's an educator with the British Columbia Schizophrenia Society. And I've just learned that Hardeep really has been doing this work for 20 years, 18 of them with BCSS. Most recently, Hardeep moved from her role from Fraser Health Authority, and she's also a family member of somebody who has schizoaffective disorder. She's been on both sides of the service and has seen what difference it makes for families to be included and supported in their loved one's journey. So a warm welcome to both presenters today. I'm going to turn you over first to Susan, and you'll know that we'll just hold questions to the end. I will be here just monitoring the chat, so if any questions come up, I will do my utmost to remember those and bring them back. So thank you. With that, over to Susan.
Thank you, Regina, and thank you to the Douglas program that allows me as a family caregiver to come and share some thoughts with you all, and also that you made this webinar open access. So I think there's a lot of family caregivers who are listening, and I would love it if more dialogue could be exchanged between family caregivers and all service providers, and certainly in psychosocial rehab, which is so important to so many of us. On this first slide, I did include 2 web addresses because, as Regina, I think, mentioned, I write about mental illness policy from the perspective of a family caregiver dealing with severe mental illness, psychotic disorders. I write for Huffington Post and the Tyee. And then I also have my email address there, so that if you would like to send me comments or whatever later on, you can certainly do that as well. For many years, I've maintained a BCC'd e-list through which I distribute items of interest to families, people with disorders, clinicians, sometimes educators, about severe mental illness research, policies, events, opportunities. So please feel free to contact me. I don't see that little arrow about how I make something
Let's go find that arrow. Let's go stick it out here.
There. That's all. That's perfect. You made it easy. Thank you. I'm set. That's wonderful. The presentation topics include a preface about shared and possibly not shared beliefs. When we'll be talking about those, I'll be talking about the family journey. My particular journey has been going on for 19 years, since that's when our younger daughter, had her first psychotic break. And I'll be discussing very common difficulties families experience, because during these 19 years, certainly a major coping strategy for me has been to be as involved as possible with other families who are on this same journey, and I learn a lot from them. We'll be moving on to services that families want, and then finally, some ideas about how you can help families. So I think it is useful to identify and discuss beliefs that we share and beliefs that we may not share. And I think it'll probably be easier to talk about the beliefs we share, and the beliefs we may not share, I think is important territory, so that we just get a better idea of how different people see things, and we can understand where each other are coming from better. So I'm hoping that these are beliefs we share. I'm going to assume, and then not deal with the fact if it's a mistaken assumption, that we all do believe here that mental illnesses exist. And people with severe mental illnesses, and I think that's considered to be the 4% of the population who deal with various forms of schizophrenia and bipolar disorder and the psychotic disorders. These people deserve the best possible evidence-based medical and psychosocial rehabilitation services. And a related belief is that most people in Canada with severe mental illnesses are not receiving this quality of care. So a belief we may not share, and I'm always interested to understand this better, is that schizophrenia is a brain disorder with positive, negative, and cognitive symptoms. And this is the way the contemporary psychiatric community understands this illness, and contemporary neurology. And I've given you a link. This is the second of the two links, and I've got links on a lot of these slides that you may want to pursue. The NIMH brochure on schizophrenia is packed with useful information. And for people who haven't come across the U.S. National Institute of Mental Health, that is the largest government-funded research organization in the world looking at mental illness. This is not big pharma funded. It is taxpayer funded. And the BC Schizophrenia Society partnership educational video that this link goes to a presentation by Dr. Diane Fredrickson, who was the manager for several years of Vancouver-based early psychosis intervention program. And she's going to explain what schizophrenia is we also have then a presentation from a very active consumer speaker, Bryn Dittmar, who does a lot of these partnership presentations, and he does live with a schizoaffective disorder as well. Thank you for giving me exactly what I need. And then you have a presentation from a father who has sons with schizophrenia. Beliefs we may not share, and this is one of the most important slides in this presentation. A belief we may not share, but I, of course, am hoping more and more we can share, is that something called anosognosia exists, and it's a brain-based condition experienced by many people with psychotic disorders. And it prevents them from understanding that they are ill. So when we hear about, stigma is the reason people don't want to be treated, other factors, for those of us who are family members and who have had a lot of experience with psychotic people, we know that anosognosia is the big factor. Why would you go and want treatment if you don't think anything is wrong with you? If you do believe that the CIA has moved into all of the houses next door to you and they are monitoring your thoughts. So if you want help, you would really like help to move all of those people out of their houses. So we understand anosognosia. And the links here to the Treatment Advocacy Center are links to the best collection among other key issues related to people with severe mental illnesses, the best collection and ongoing additions to brain-based research on anosognosia. And the reason that this is the most important slide is that it really is on whether this exists, this condition, or doesn't exist, that so much division exists on how we respond in our legal system and our treatment system with people who are psychotic, or what some of us would call psychosis, and not just unusual thoughts, but actual psychosis where people can't really differentiate between what's real and what's not real, a very vulnerable state. So among the families I know, leaving people trapped in psychosis does not protect their human rights. And certainly in British Columbia now, we have a challenge to our Mental Health Act. We have some new recommendations from the ombudsperson, and underlying some of these, well, all of them in terms of the things that families have problems with, is the idea that no matter what's going on, someone is always capable of making the best choice. And for we family caregivers, we don't think that's true. And we do not want our family members left in psychosis. And many of us, like my daughter and her friends who live with schizophrenia, would like to tell you that. Unfortunately, they aren't the people who have the voice of the psychiatric survivor movement, who often is the group that is listened to. They could not begin to go into contentious environments and tell you that they want to be protected. They don't want to be left in untreated psychosis. So, related beliefs we may not share. People with schizophrenia usually do much better with ongoing use of antipsychotic medications. And certainly in terms of these latest recommendations from the BC Ombudsperson and the Community Legal Assistance Society's document that's represented in their Operating in Darkness, there's a sense, not from the Ombudsperson, but from class that the function of antipsychotic medications is just to sedate people. That is not what the literature tells us. And if you really go to Google Scholar and you look around, that's not what is happening with effective use of antipsychotic medications. I just included one study here because it's very recent and I think it's very compelling. And it's also from Finland, which has another much more highly publicized program going with open dialogue, which the rest of Finland actually doesn't seem to have adopted. But this particular study is based on the fact that a lot of the Scandinavian countries really keep great records, great healthcare records, and make use of them in their research. So this is actually a 20-year, really that's a long longitudinal study of people who were diagnosed with first episode schizophrenia. And again, a large cohort, 8,000 people. And what they report about their investigation of this population is that the people who stayed on medication just had much better outcomes. They had very fewer relapses, and they were still alive after 20 years to a much greater extent than people who did not stay on medications or came off and on medications. Belief we may not share is that it's not in the best interest of this population for any mental health services to undermine medically necessary treatments, and there's a link to this issue. I think that's a really key, contentious topic that deserves more exploration than it will get in this presentation. I'm going to talk a bit about the family journey. Families and their ill relatives are negatively impacted by the very poor public mental illness literacy campaigns we have. And there's various reasons we have such poor programs, and they are political. They are about really two competing belief systems informing the delivery of mental health care. So the result of this really poor mental illness literacy that we have is that people don't understand what they are seeing. We certainly didn't. I came out of an undergraduate and graduate education with the beliefs that actually now really inform the alternative system. And those beliefs are, as long as you are a really loving, patient, devoted parent who accepts your child for exactly who they are and affirms them in all possible ways, at least one thing you won't have to worry about is the arrival of a serious mental illness. So in our case, that led us to looking for a therapist for our daughter when she began to flounder. Unfortunately, our therapist, as it turned out, who has a master's in counseling psych, very high-profile woman, and I write a lot about this in the memoir, did not know very much about severe mental illnesses and made choices and did interventions that really led to unnecessary long-term chaos for our daughter. So with people, when we don't know what we're doing, we often access inappropriate services. And one of the issues with all of the negative consequences that can come from this is that when there are these delays in getting to the right services, there's a longer duration of untreated psychosis. And the research is really clear. The longer that duration, the worse the outcomes. With the family journey, families may learn, but often don't, about the good psychoeducation programs that are available for free, where they can get essential information, a lot of information about these disorders, and how to best cope with them and get support. Strengthening Families Together is offered from the BC Schizophrenia Society. This is their web address, and you will be fortunate to hear from our new treasurer in Vancouver, Hardeep, who's worked for many years in Fraser, but now we get to have her and her vitality. And that course, Strengthening Families Together, was actually developed from the course that was originally taught here for over a decade called Family to Family. And it is still taught through the Pathways, Serious Mental Illness Society based in North Van. And Family to Family was developed by NAMI, the National Alliance on Mental Illness, started by family caregivers of people with schizophrenia. And this particular course is taught by trained family members. And it is the only psychoeducation course that can really claim to be evidence-based. And it underwent a 3-year University of Maryland research project comparing families who had the course with families who didn't have the course, but they got it later on, in terms of outcomes like how much did families understand and accept these illnesses, how competent did they feel to have useful responses, how much greater sense of well-being did they have, and certainly of great interest to the people that we need to keep track of the bottom line finances, there were many fewer relapses of people with severe mental illnesses in these families. So family members in general, our family members do not get good psychoeducation about their illness. It just really, to me, doesn't exist, and I sure have looked, except in these early psychosis intervention programs. And my daughter and her friends, who've been so stable for so many years, were very fortunate. There used to be something called the UBC Schizophrenia Day Program, and every week in that often year-long day program, there was really solid psychoeducation. And that consistency led people to really understand and accept and learn to manage their illnesses. This is the link to this very valuable resource that the Ministry of Health put together with help from clinicians in the field, this terrific toolkit. So in terms of the impact of severe psychotic illnesses on families, it is certainly and has an impact on their emotional life. And I didn't even go into the chaos of the illness and the chaos being worse than it has to be given the nature of the illness, but given the nature of the current state of services and other factors, it's pretty emotionally grueling. And a key emotional issue is that people with severe illnesses, they can emerge after they become stable being very different than they might have been before the onset of their illness. And they are confronting very different life challenges that these families, have not been training themselves for all along. There's big social consequences for families because we have such poor mental illness public literacy. Often people's social networks start to fall apart because the responses families get, you just were never strict enough, or do you think you were too strict, or just everything that comes from ignorance about these disorders really damages families' social networks. That's why I always encourage families to deepen our relationships with families with shared experience. It's just incredibly growth producing for us all. There are very severe financial consequences. Many of our families, we've had very disrupted work lives because we really do need somebody to be there for the person, especially when there's a lot of psychosis, and especially if actually we are trying to keep our family member out of the hospital, although absolutely the hospital is often the best place for sure. And there's many significant new expenses if we want our family to have access to all kinds of services that are not provided. Also, this is a link to the only survey I've seen like this, and it's from an organization called, it's an article about this survey, organization called Euphemy, which started in Europe from family-run organizations, but the Canadian Family Schizophrenia Society did include family caregivers. So it's basically a survey, and would love for something like this to be repeated all over the place about family caregivers' experiences. And that you can see in the article. The main issue is that aging family caregivers feel there is not a mental health system in place, and they anticipate that's adequate, that's going to take care of a person with such severe mental illnesses and such significant ongoing needs. And they believe that they will be caregivers for the rest of their lives, and they feel very concerned about what happens after that. More difficulties with the mental health system. Really, I think we need to investigate the impact of parent blaming theories that are just intrinsic to psychodynamic theory, which is certainly what I trained in. And really, I think if we look objectively at all beliefs in the alternative community, those are also parent blaming. And when you have those belief systems so prevalent among many service providers, among programs that are training the service providers, you get interactions that really undermine families' belief in themselves at a time when they may have never been as challenged to cope as they are in adjusting to having a family member with such a severe illnesses. And also, we certainly got out of, with help and after a long struggle, disengaged our daughter from really a very damaging relationship with a therapist who did not understand severe mental illnesses. But people can encounter these kinds of clinicians who, with the best of intentions, look at a client and think, this person just doesn't function well, they haven't been taught to be independent. We really need to help separate them from what must be a toxic family and just get them out. And, we did not have that. By then we had developed a solid relationship with a very solid psychiatrist. But these families have talked about clinicians that even though their family member is not well, and they are very happy to have the family member live with them for as long as necessary. And lots of young adults are doing that these days for all kinds of reasons. Their family member was encouraged to move out, and it did not go well. It created more chaos. So they're part of this issue of how do we educate clinicians, and what kinds of educations are we missing, like how to cooperate and work with productively family caregivers. There's a reluctance of clinicians to cooperate with families. Look, I think there's just great clinicians out there, and I think it is a problem that certainly I see in Vancouver from teams, the quantity of the caseload these clinicians are supposed to carry, it's just a marvel. They cope as well. And the thought of now beginning to also include meeting with families could be totally overwhelming. Families usually do not receive and can't contribute essential information, even though from everything I see from on top, that is not the intention any longer of mental health systems, mental and health authority. As well, I think that there's lots of room for improvement within health authorities and provincially to educate staff and families about what does the Mental Health Act actually say about the sharing of information. And the Mental Health Act makes it very clear in an appendix where they address this. In fact, they use the example of course, people have a right to privacy about their mental health records and what's going on, their mental health care. But this appendix goes on to say, in the example they choose, parents who are taking care of an adult with schizophrenia, well, they certainly need to know essential things about what's going on. They need to know the diagnosis, the medications, when appointments are. That is so clearly spelled out. And at least from the feedback I hear, that is so rarely occurring. So more difficulties. Families are not involved in planning services. I think that was certainly the intention, and I really do give credit to the Mental Health Commission for going ahead and endorsing that. I believe that if we had families involved in planning services, we would have begun implementing cognitive remediation programs in British Columbia, or at least ensuring that all clinicians and clients learn about the well-researched cognitive losses that are understood to be the biggest factor in the ongoing disability of this population. This is well-researched cognitive losses with working memory, short-term memory, concentration, planning, judgment, social skills. And there are evidence-based cognitive remediation programs that have been widely implemented in other countries. For various reasons, there aren't. But I will remain eternally grateful to BC Psychosocial Rehab, because when I had connected with a partner in the mission to have BC's first conference, Canada's first conference on cognitive remediation, approached the BC Schizophrenia Society to partner with us. They did, and we were joined by the BC Psychosis Program, which works with people with the most severe disorders, BC EPI, which is really interested in cognitive remediation, and we were joined by your wonderful organization, who I began to understand has been thinking about these cognitive issues for a long time. So we've these key organizations, and we have been meeting ever since this October 2017 sold-out conference at Vancouver General Hospital to try to figure out how to implement both education of everybody that needs to know about these cognitive losses and about the remediation programs that are cheap to implement, the best programs. So I'm going to leave that. Families are not involved in evaluating services, although lots of programs say that's supposed to happen, but I've never been asked to in my 19 years. I really support the many things about the recovery model and its intention to absolutely bring about greater hope and client-centered services. But I do think that as it's being implemented, there's a tendency to minimize the ongoing symptoms of people with the most severe illnesses. And I just want to give a couple of examples. My daughter was able to get services through a wonderful Vancouver agency called Gastown Vocational Services. And it is the most family inclusive agency I've ever encountered. It's just terrific. And it offered my daughter something she really needed, were wonderful opportunities to have supported volunteer opportunities out in the community with a peer support worker who could help her because she absolutely needed help in managing and understanding these environments. When she turned 30, Gastown Vocational Services let us know, and this was not their choice, and I do attribute it to the recovery model, that under the new model, people at the age of 30 were now to be considered, all of them, appropriate to move on to supported employment. I mean, the goal is paid employment. And I certainly understand bigger economic issues. We would all do so much better if all of these people would just go out and get jobs and stop being disabled. This is not in the best interest of this population. Also, for people who have these illnesses, there is already a high rate of obsessive compulsive disorder. And another issue is that the miracle drug, and it really is the best gold standard antipsychotic, clozapine, which is underutilized, but we who have come over to clozapine realize the magic of where it can often within just a few weeks get profoundly psychotic people out of psychosis. A bad side effect, and these meds have side effects, is that it can exacerbate obsessive compulsive disorder. So obsessive compulsive disorder is already a big, 2% of the population has really significant OCD. And there are medical and psychological treatments available that are the research best combined. And there are really intense day programs, not in BC from what I can find, and there are really intensive, in fact, inpatient programs. Sunnybrook Hospital in Ontario just opened one, and this is all about voluntary programs. These are people that want help with the condition that is torturing them. And so I think this minimizing of what people are dealing with has been one reason OCD is just overlooked. And it's huge, and it creates tremendous suffering. So another difficulty is growing exposure to programs within the system and events that have an anti-medication and anti-medical model belief. And I just do see this term medical model kind of thrown around. It usually has air quotes around it somehow. And I think it's thrown around in a way to mean something that I don't think it really means. Well, first of all, I don't think that people who approach these illnesses with a sense of a biological base ever talk about a medical model approach for how we offer all services. I think when this term is used, it's used with the idea of something that I think might have certainly been there in the past. Well, what these people just really need is a pill. But as somebody who has been a very volunteer on many projects with psychiatrists and physicians who are really interested in this population of most people with the most severe mental illnesses. None of them think that all you need to do is give some people pills. I don't think there are enough psychiatrists, so I don't think that most people, if you talk to them, feel, the families and people with illnesses, that they have enough time to even have conversations with a psychiatrist that will ensure they can be getting the best possible medical advice. But I don't think we can ask these people to do psychosocial rehab, but I don't know any of these psychiatrists or physicians who do not believe that good evidence-based psychosocial rehab programs are not essential. They are absolutely essential. So I wish this habit of use of language that I see, I wish people would rethink it. So another difficulty that we're just going to breeze over here, although I and 3 other mothers are talking about this issue at a panel at the upcoming National Collaborative Care Conference that's in Richmond at the end of May, which is this pattern, and I understand why it developed, of combining people who only have a serious mental illness with those who have concurrent disorders in the delivery of different kinds of groups and the delivery of housing. I think I have 5 more minutes, is that right? Okay, so difficulties with mental health services. There's too few services like what we have in Vancouver, CAR 8788, which it used to be you could call them, they would answer the phone, and you do it when there's an emergency. You don't think you're going to be able to get your family member who is really psychotic to even the ER, and certainly for the long wait in most places they would anticipate. So you could call CAR 87 and 88, and when it's all really working well, a psychiatric nurse and a police officer, and the police officer, you could actually say, well, that person really needs to come in uniform, or do not have the person come in uniform. They really wanted it to work, would come to your house, evaluate the person, and if the person needed to go to the hospital for evaluation, they would take the person there. So the person does not leave the ER, and I think got the person to be able to see appropriate help earlier. Now, I don't know why, maybe I hope it's temporary, but I also have heard that the service is underfunded. Families are saying they're calling it and they're getting answering machines, and they're finding out there's going to be days of delays. So this used to be called an emergency service. That's not emergency. When families get to the ERs, there's usually really long wait rooms. It's spectacular that Vancouver Coastal Health has developed now an access and assessment center. People can be seen really very quickly if they want to be. Families report, and I did bring this to share with Regina, the BCSS just did a survey. It's not online. All of the report on it hasn't been written up, to see if families, because we were hearing anecdotes, feel like there's might be a shortage of psychiatric beds. So from these various comments, and these are including people who wanted treatment, as well as access to involuntary beds, and the anecdotes also relate to premature discharges. Oh, now I did a bad thing. I've lost the total thing, and I didn't.
Let's have a look.
Oh, she's back. And as soon as it saw you come back, then it decided to say, oh, yes. So the problem is there's not access to supported housing, and there's a lack of access to professionally led support and education groups for clients. And these are some of the most complicated illnesses that exist. And somehow this is a population that's not entitled to very many clinicians who have the most extensive training on these disorders. And also there are increasingly, from within the delivery of the mental health system, unhelpful messages to families. And I think it does go along with one aspect of the recovery model that's not so helpful. Actually telling families they shouldn't be so involved, don't be too involved. And the research is really clear. For people with schizophrenia, the biggest factor in ongoing outcome, the best outcomes are if the family has stayed involved. Families are actually told, do not pursue involuntary treatment. So you can see the belief system informing those messages. And increasingly, families are in sessions that we go to with support staff, and families are understandably frustrated and angry and anxious. And that all those emotions are understood to be something we need to be working on ourselves, and lots of strategies for working on ourselves, instead of, to me, advocating for better services for our family members. What do we want? We want cognitive remediation programs, as we've talked about. We want appropriate psychoeducation for our family members. Families feel like they're trying to supply this. We want these professionally led support and education groups. We want access to adequate inpatient and outpatient involuntary treatment when needed. Voluntary is, of course, always better. We want respite services for families. We want a variety of supported housing, supported education, supported volunteer work, supported employment, and access to meaningful activities, including lots of things that will help our family members pursue physical fitness. how you can help families promote the greater use of occupational therapists in delivering range of programs, including assistance with supported housing. I'm going to try to make this one anecdote really, really quick. When our daughter moved into independent living that we created for her, I've been on a list for 15 years for supported housing, and our daughter's very disabled. We haven't come up on this list. We went to the services that Community Living BC supplies for free to those lucky families, but you can buy those services that they have for helping people learn to manage independent living. And these were great services. And the person who had an OT kind of background had all kinds of strategies we never thought about. She worked for quite a long time with our daughter. But she said to me when we needed to end this, because she was moving on to something else, she'd been working for several years with lots of clients through Community Living BC. She personally had never worked with somebody who is as disabled as our daughter. So something isn't right here. So how you can help families build cooperative relationships with families whenever possible. This is really great. Have families access free, help us access these programs. Lots of families have been at this for years and they don't know these education programs exist. Help families learn about and access services for our family members that they don't know exist. I'm not providing examples because I'm going over. The final note is that together we can help people with the most severe mental illnesses stay in necessary treatments, achieve the best possible recovery, and avoid homelessness, victimization, addiction, and incarceration, which we know happens a lot. Thank you.
So thank you, Susan, for that amazing presentation. I'm going to just quote somebody who typed in as you were speaking, and they said, "What an amazing, articulate, compassionate, and insightful presentation. Your ability to integrate reality with recommendations is refreshingly illuminating." So just wanted you to hear that before you.
Will you email that to me and I can just pull it up on a bad day?
That sounds like a good plan. And so with that in mind, no pressure intended, Hardeep, but we're going to go over to you. Thank you for popping your camera on, and I think you have your audio on as well. So just over to you. So for people on the line, just please know we don't have slides for this part of the presentation, which is just fine. But over to you, Hardeep.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you so much, Susan.
Just to remind you just about the audio.
Are we good? Can we hear? Thank you, Susan. That was brilliant. Always important to bring families to the forefront. As mentioned earlier, I am a family member, and I didn't even know that I could go and visit my cousin in the psychiatric ward. That's how little we knew back in the day. So I know there's lots of families now knowing that they don't know that they can be involved, and involvement has increased so much more than just a visit to the hospital. So I think you're shedding amazing light on this, and more importantly, you are doing it worldwide. You're not just doing it here central in little Vancouver. So I commend you for everything you've been doing. So I'm with the BC Schizophrenia Society, and I'm very pleased to say I've been with the organization for over 18 years. At first, I was working in the Fraser Health Authority, servicing clients in the Surrey, Delta, Langley, White Rock region, and have just recently, in the last 4 months, moved over to Vancouver Coastal. And I'm delighted to be here as well. We have amazing family members working diligently and very hard to support their loved ones. A lot of times with very limited resources. So we're very happy to bring over the resources, myself and my team, to Vancouver. We're quite well known for our support groups. Support groups are really an incredible opportunity, as Susan's mentioned many times, for families to just feel validated and heard. families really feel like they're just in this alone, and you really can't talk to your families and friends about it because they don't really know how to support you. They don't really get you. And sometimes, frankly, they're quite frustrated hearing the same thing over and over again because they're finding that not too much is changing and not a lot of good things are happening. And they don't really know, they're at a loss. So that's why the BC Schizophrenia Society was formed over 33 years ago by family members and friends for folks who had schizophrenia. They just came together and said, you know what, we need to support our loved ones. We don't know what to do. We don't know how to help them. We're not getting a ton of information from folks out there. So what can we do? And there's been some amazing, lovely, lovely ladies and brilliant conversations around coffee tables with people having those conversations in order for our organization to be where we are today. So I thank those wonderful folks. We're very fortunate to have 15 people like myself who work throughout the province. So we're not limited just to the Vancouver Coastal Health Authority, which is the region I happen to be in, but we're spread throughout the province. And our organization has quite a bit of good information on our website of just bcss.org. And if you plop on your region of where you are, you can see if there's somebody for you in the Cranbrook region, somebody for out in Prince George, somebody for you in Terrace. So what I'm speaking about is generally across the province, maybe give or take a different program or two, but we're really trying to make this a provincial-wide program accessible to all family members, no matter where they live, so that they have equal opportunity to help their loved ones. And, you know, really try to help prevent caregiver burnout, because what we find is they're so busy helping that they kind of forget to take care of themselves. So if you can get yourself to a support group, hear from other like-minded people, they also will help to remind you that you need to take care of yourself, right? Get your life jacket on first before you try to help somebody else. And that's really a critical piece. We have 8 branches throughout the province as well that try to do very similar work to what we do, a lot of education and support and advocacy. And Susan mentioned about our Strengthening Families Education Together course. It's quite an amazing program. We rebranded it. It really does stem from the Family to Family Education course that she mentioned that was started by NAMI in the United States. But we kind of made it into Canadian content. So our SFT is more Canadian facts in there and more of the Canadian content, but still giving the same kind of really critical information and education that families just need in a kind of a snapshot, instead of kind of going on the World Wide Web and being in many different directions and finding some, you know, stuff that maybe isn't very pleasant in their journey, right? A lot of times the anti-psychiatry websites tend to get right on top, and families kind of get really freaked out about where have we entered, what are we doing, what's going on, right? So it's really important that they do get correct critical information. We're very fortunate that what we've found over the years is that the First Nations population has a bit different needs in the sense of strengthening families. So we have gone to the different bands and developed a curriculum based on First Nations folks and helping and supporting them in the capacity on their territory and that sort of thing. So it's really incredible that we have launched SFT into a First Nations program as well. I spoke about the support groups. Another really incredible program that we have is the partnership presentation. And that is an opportunity for folks, anybody across the province, in work sites, in school settings, in corporate settings, wherever they may be, and they just want to get more education and understanding around schizophrenia and other major mental illnesses. So we do what we call a storytelling model, where an educator or another person comes in and delivers the facts on mental illness. And then we have incredible people who are there to share their story, right? It's quite raw. It's their personal story, the struggles that they've grew up with, and kind of where they're at now. Really, the intention is to inspire hope. We want people to realize it's an illness like any other illness. And we want people to realize that there is hope and people can get treatment. If they had been diagnosed with diabetes, you know, the whole family rallies around what can we do, how can we help, you know, any other illness that something happens. But when someone's been diagnosed with schizophrenia, you can lose a lot of folks along the way for reasons such as they don't even know what the illness is about. They don't even know how to begin to help, or for really kind of fearful, oh, it might happen to my family, or we don't want to be involved with those kind of people, you know, those kind of things. So there's really a lot of different schools of thought. So it's really important for families to realize that they are supported. And then when we go out and do the education, we're kind of opening the eyes and the minds of other folks who maybe in their mind haven't been touched by mental illness. Whether they know it or not, with schizophrenia touching 1 in 100 people, chances are, whether they're directly related to an individual or not, but they will come across people in their lifetime easily of, 5 to 10 people who have been diagnosed with the diagnosis of schizophrenia. And this is kind of an opportunity for them to hear more. And it's incredible for our speakers. They really feel like they're validated, their feelings are heard, and more importantly, that they may be saving many other people from not trying to access service. It really just kind of puts a face to the illness, and people say, whoa, they look just like us. Like, oh, wow, I had no idea that person had schizophrenia. I had no idea those are the struggles that they were facing. And also, depending on the environment that we go to, we also bring along a family member, because it's really critical for folks to hear from the perspective of the family. As we know, mental illness does not just strike our loved ones, right? It really can sometimes wreak havoc in the family, right? It has an impact on everybody in the family, whether you're a parent or a sibling or a spouse. A lot of times, life changes, and Susan mentioned as well that financially families are hit with huge burdens, and of course that can cause a lot of disagreement amongst family, right? So we see a lot of different side effects, if you will, for someone being diagnosed with schizophrenia, because it really has an impact on the family. So we have incredible programs in the school called the Reach Out Psychosis Tour. Again, getting into talk to young folks at the age of grade 9, 10, 11, 12, when this illness strikes. This is what it looks like. This is what it can be. This is how you can look out for your friends. This is where you can go if you suspect something. This is where you can go if you suspect something, that sort of thing. So that's an incredible program. With Kids in Control, and the Teens in Control program is an amazing program that our organization started many years ago, but it's just really taken off recently with Rachel, and she's done an incredible job with it, of just helping family members, usually the children, between the ages of 13 and 18. So kids are under the age of, I believe, 8 to 12 and 13 to 18 for our teens program. But a lot of times family members, especially if they're single parents, their children are helping support them, right? If they're not well enough to do a lot of things themselves, the child becomes a parent. They take on a lot of roles. They start kind of isolating themselves from other friends. They don't want their friends to come over because they don't want to see what mommy or daddy look like back in their own home and that sort of stuff. So our Kids in Control and Teens in Control program is another incredible opportunity for people to really open their eyes about what's going on and how it has an impact on the whole family. I think that's probably about 10 minutes. I could talk for 10 hours if you need me to, but if we want to maybe open it up for questions, is that what we're thinking?
Absolutely. Okay. Oops. Sorry, we're just getting our sound sorted out there. Thank you. Thank you, Hardeep, again, for a very different perspective. I can see why Susan said that very happy to have you at BCSS. You clearly have a very large experience in your 18 or 20 years. So thank you very much for sharing that with us. So yes, we're very happy to open it to questions, comments, thoughts. We'll just get our cameras up and running. But I think just in the meantime, I do my rambly bit before people ask the questions. I'll give you a few moments to just pull together your questions. But I'm really impressed on the chat, how many resources people have shared and how you've shared specific events that are happening, and the desire to move into rural areas with some of these programs as well. So, I understand that it can be really hard to roll out what you think makes sense and what has the evidence. So I certainly have had experience with that, but just kudos to you and support to you, and so happy that people are working on that. Manny, I think that we also just discovered recently a wellness recovery action planning opportunity for families. So maybe if you could just post that link, that would just be really helpful as well. And in the meantime, with just any questions, or maybe even from panelists, maybe you have some thoughts or comments that you want to make before we move on. And we've had a couple of questions, so I'll just answer this verbally. Will this presentation be available? It absolutely will. Within about a week, we'll have it up on the psyrehab.ca website in our archive section. So definitely all these resources that we're pointing you to will be available to you. And then there was a question from Dakota, I guess, who asks, can you elaborate on some of the needs identified in First Nation communities? So I don't know who would like to take that. Who would like to take that?
I may be able to speak a little bit about that. She's asking about our SFT. So we had an opportunity to do a 3-year pilot project with the curriculum of the Strengthening Families Together program, and we took it into the different bands. I think we did maybe one of our major tests was out in the valley in Chilliwack area, but what we did is we rewrote that material so it's culturally appropriate, culturally sensitive, and really when we deliver our course, the Strengthening Families to course, we deliver it in a way that's really safe for that population to attend. So in terms of exactly what was developed and stuff, I unfortunately can't speak to it. I haven't taught that course yet, but it was really a kind of a needs assessment we found that was really lacking throughout the province, and we've gone up and down the province with that course now as well. We finished our 3-year test, and I think we're into our 4.5 year now.
That's wonderful. Maybe if you have time, maybe there's a connection that if somebody has specific questions, maybe that we could.
Absolutely. And they also, if she goes onto our website, bcss.org, and probably clicked under education course, and then SFT FN will come up for her as well.
Terrific. Thank you. So just that's a great resource just in case it sounds like maybe somebody's developing their own work as well. So also we have some feedback about the Kelowna branch offering educational support for those living with mental illness, Bridges and Your Recovery Journey, offering 3 times a year and promoting CMHA RAP program, Wellness Recovery Action Planning. One person mentions that she's actually delivered the Strengthening Family course and engaged Penticton Indian band. That's so brilliant to see.
It is. Yeah, it's fascinating. Yeah, it's amazing that we're really branching out. Yeah. Okay. Another person mentioning that they're presented to the lower I can't say that word, pardon me.
Similkameen.
Thank you kindly, Indian band. So that's so great to see that maybe this work really has resonance with local communities and, will enact some change. Cool. So yeah, we're just very happy to see if you have any questions or any additional comments. We're certainly lots of people saying that they're very grateful for the presentation, and it seems the information seems to resonate. So perhaps we have some family members on the line who are saying, that really makes sense to me, and that's always a great litmus test for how information lands. And Jen has a thought?
The person who's admin, their messages are only coming to us. They're not being posted to the broader
So
group,
just
so they have to change their settings.
So just to give you a little bit of a notion, whomever is admin, we don't know who that is, that those messages are just coming to us. So nice that we're able to also verbally share that with people. But if you want to just change your settings to share it with all panelists, that will ensure, and attendees, thank you, Jen, and that will just make sure that your thoughts are just shared with everybody. This person also said there's going to be a Sharing Families facilitator training session held in Kamloops soon, with open seats for those in the Okanagan First Nations band. That's
fantastic.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So valuable.
We've got the population. We just need more trained facilitators to get out into the region and start delivering, right? And obviously more money to come with it.
Yeah. We got a little feedback for you, Hardeep. Family member just wanted to say that Hardeep has been so helpful to me in my understanding and helping my son. She's the very best. Always that feedback, Hardeep.
Thank you.
I was saying excellent discussion. What is out there? Somebody asked for family respite for those youth with mental illness. There's no help for those adults with mental illness, but what is there for youth?
Unfortunately, I don't believe there is anything that I'm aware of. Child and youth mental health may have maybe some discretional funds, but not something that's really respite and ongoing and something for everybody to access, unfortunately. We did have a program in the Fraser, and we had money allocated for that specifically, and we actually ran a fairly successful respite program, but that came to an end when that contract ended.
So Not so good news. Susan.
This was just a little confusing to me if I am understanding the message. What is out there for family respite for those with youth with mental illness? There's help for those with adults with mental illness, but what is there for youth? So I'm still not.
I think she's saying there's respite services for adults, families who have an adult with a mental illness, but there isn't respite services for families with a youth, if I understand it correctly.
That's very small and in isolated areas. I mean, people have often asked me in Vancouver, and I don't know of during years and years if there's ever been any respite services.
We did BPSS or offer a respite program back in the day, maybe about five years plus, and we ran a very successful respite program.
Yes, absolutely.
Funds came to an end, and the story goes.
Yes, and that's certainly, I think, a perfect organization to do it. I do think in general, when people make their advocacy lists, that's really important. The families I know who are dealing with other kinds of illnesses, and we are an aging demographic, so we have lots of family caregivers for people with dementia and Alzheimer's. There's so many more respite components built in, even just the existence of day programs. And burnout's a real issue.
Yes, absolutely. 100%.
So thank you. Thanks for bringing us back to, I think I misread that text, Susan, so thanks for bringing us back there. And just to concur that it's a huge need and unmet need, it seems, in many respects. People asking us just again where to get this information. So thanks, Manny. I think you gave us the addresses of psyrehab.ca if you wish to view this webinar after the fact. One person saying that I've invited a family member to join the first glimpse at psychoeducation, very intrigued and keen to learn more. So thank you so much for the introduction and a brighter future for them. So thank you both for offering that to people online today. This person says access for youth varies throughout the province. Is there in Kelowna what we have a CYMH and Foundry? So Foundry being
youth and mental health, and the Foundry. Foundry's throughout the province now.
Right.
Yeah.
So that pretty special service, I guess, that was built with some good money, and certainly fulfilling a need. But just, I guess, the idea remaining that services vary very much throughout the province.
Absolutely, yeah. Kamloops has a brilliant, they call it the hub, I believe, and it's just amazing central core services helping families, youth, and children.
And so somebody just acknowledges that excellent respite program in Vancouver and Fraser Health, but both have been both funding, both have been cut right now.
Yes, unfortunately.
Person in Kelowna says the organization we partner with for all mental illness support and help our interior mental health, child and youth, different areas have different ages and requirements, CMHA, right? And just follow up, Foundry for youth with mental health and addiction throughout BC with 5 Foundry in place, another 5 to be created with the goal of 30 Foundry to be available throughout BC. I'm not sure about that timeline. So actually I didn't know about those new 5 coming online. That's really great. That provides specialized services in particular for youth and a range of services as well. So good to see that. Person says that Fraser Health does offer respite services to families supporting adults through their family support services program.
Yes, Fraser took on the contract after BCSS no longer did that program, and they've got in-house respite now, but that's only for family members within Fraser.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that clarification. Just wondering if anybody has some more, any more questions or person says, thank you, that was great. Susan, can you give me more information on peer support conference in May?
Okay, this actually is not a peer support conference. This is an organization that was started by the Canadian Psychiatric Association in partnership with the National Family Physicians Group, and it's been around for about 20 years having national conferences. I think a big goal was to help family practitioners who hadn't had a lot of training in psychiatry, but often have to deal with these illnesses, have access over a couple of days to a lot of psychiatric input. And I really like this organization because it's become someplace where they let family caregivers do presentations. So, and they have special inexpensive rates for consumers and for families. And this year's conference is in Richmond at the end of May. And if you Google Collaborative Care Conference, Richmond 2019, I'm sure you'll get to the right link.
Great. How do you suggest we address the challenge of youth under 18 years of age dealing with mental illness and not involving family members if the youth does not want the family involved?
So similar to our organization, we've primarily worked with families over the age of 19, so adults with a mental illness. The Force is an organization throughout the province. They're called Family Smart now, so they do the same kind of advocacy work and helping support families with youth who have a mental illness. And obviously the Child and Youth Mental Health Centers locally in each community.
Thank you much. So there was a question about what does BC Advanced Practice stand on the current anti-medication, anti-illness groups. So I'm not sure how to go about answering that because I'm not sure what we're, I guess to speak from psychosocial rehabilitation, maybe I'll just start there. I very much the belief is that PSR is about having the skills, the abilities, the attitudes, the competencies to support people in their recovery, so that, you know, people's job is really the recovery part, helping people live lives that are that have meaning and purpose for people, and that from a psychosocial rehabilitation perspective, we're really helping people develop those skills and abilities, helping practitioners in particular develop those skills and abilities to support people in their recovery. And that includes often that including medication and psychosocial rehabilitation techniques and tools can be of benefit to people. For sure, there are people who recover, thank you very much, without professional intervention, and that's another, you know, that's another mode of recovery for people. I think that what we're really trying to do is offer people choice as well. So really have that inclusive sense of that if people are maybe not taking medication and powerfully saying this is not what we want to do, but if there are skills and tools and techniques that we can afford that individual to help them and support them along their recovery journey, that would be desirable. But obviously, as Susan spoke earlier, sometimes people do experience an illness and are in need of support and are in need of you know, help when maybe they're just not feeling well. So I guess the answer is that to really honor where that person's coming from, and also just to balance that with the needs of the individual and the illness. So definitely we're cognizant that illness is a component, sadly, of our human existence, and that people need help. People need help sometimes of being a danger to themselves or to others. So a fairly encompassing perspective. So I don't know how I've done on all that. That's a really big question that we could have a whole webinar on, I think. As a start, that might be a place to start. So yeah. So we also had a sharing of conference website. So thank you for that. Susan, this next one may come to you. Susan, you spoke about some positive rehab places for your daughter. Can you repeat which ones were good? I wrote down Gastown, but missed some of the others. Thank you.
Well, unfortunately, I hate to start to get to disappointing things because it's all going so well. But for about 20 years, there was something called the UBC Schizophrenia Day Program. And it was for people who were really severely impacted, like my daughter has a really severe form of illness. And people could go 5 days a week and go there for months. And so that was very useful to my daughter. And I know now that the BC Psychosis Program which is for the 25 people in the province from different health authorities who have the most refractory illnesses can go there 4 months, and they have just incredible expertise. But I think that they began to respond. I'm not ever sure how change happens, but they now actually have started a day program. And everybody talks about it as a really wonderful thing. In terms of useful things, well, right now, but it's not that well publicized, there actually is a cognitive remediation and metacognitive therapy program available at VGH at the Diamond Center. It's offered through the Cognitive Neuroscience Lab, and its staff members, some of you in PSR have heard Mahesh Menon, one of them, and Todd Woodward from Metacognitive Therapy. They run it as a research project. But what I really appreciate is that even if somebody's not going to be useful for them as a research subject because they've already done it, like my daughter, they will let them in if there's space. And the problematic thing is I don't think many people heard about this. And so there is space in these. And I know at the same time, I hear people, families all over the province saying, okay, yeah, it was the conference and there were these resources, and why isn't there cognitive remediation? My family member needs it just to function better with adult daily living. And these are skills that can come with cognitive remediation programs. And so it's about being able to offer the right services to people, and they need to expand these services.
A comment about somebody who listened to Erin's talk yesterday, a neuroscientist who is stable due to medication and has schizophrenia. She says it's not true. It's not true recovery, but really a discovery, as it's never as it used to be before the illness. Less expectation on the patient that way. So I think that's probably a comment about notion of recovery, and that maybe that word recovery is not a panacea for everybody, something I'm inclined to agree with, but just provides a way forward. So interested to hear what other people say as well.
I just wanted to point out as well, in most communities, nonprofit organizations run clubhouses. And so those are a kind of they are a rehab facility in terms of where people can go in for an hour or two and attend various different activities or programs that interest them. But they have staff and they help people work towards recovery as well. I'm assuming they're in most communities. I know we had quite a few in Surrey, and Vancouver has them, and I'm assuming throughout the province they have them associated with some nonprofit.
Thanks, Heidi. Next comment was just somebody about trying to find cognitive remediation services for their son. However, just the diagnosis might have not been there, so that person didn't get access to the service, it sounds like. So I'm so sorry about that. I guess accessibility remains such a huge issue in terms of service delivery in our systems, but hopefully that gets resolved. As the person speaks about the BC Guide to Mental Health Act, has FIPA bulletin on the need to involve families of people with mental illness, even if the client does not agree.
That's right. We do a lot of talks around that as well when we go and present to the nursing students at UBC. Right from the get-go, they have that information, right? As opposed to going into the field and then kind of going, I can't talk to you. It's kind of like that we, as in BCSS, have spoken to people about what they can do. You can do a lot without divulging confidentiality, but still respecting the client and the parents to have a little bit more understanding of how to engage.
Thank you kindly, Hardeep. Super. Not sure if Susan, you have anything to add, or maybe.
I really just appreciate this opportunity for all of these various different stakeholders that we are to come together in a situation like this. I really congratulate BCPSR for making this happen.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's a dialogue, right? So we started, people talk about it, and hopefully we can break down that stigma related to it.
Well, we couldn't do it without you guys, so just know that it's definitely a partnership, and I'm sure we've lots of ways to go, but just really great to begin the dialogue. And yeah, cool. So this person says in Kelowna offers programs and a social setting for those to get together living with mental illness, offer support as well. Say offers peer support to those living with mental illness. This person asks, do you have any suggestions for a starting point to find family resources in Ontario? My goodness, that's a long way away. I'm not sure if either one of you would like to pick that up. Any suggestions for starting point to find a family resources in Ontario?
Schizophrenia Society of Canada is based out. I'm not sure exactly where.
In Manitoba, but there's a Schizophrenia Society of Ontario, which has some online.
Yeah, that's a great starting point. Just even Googling it.
There's also CAMH, sort of Canada's flagship hospital, the Centre for Addiction and Mental Health, has a website with a lot of really good resources. And there's something that we don't have here, which is a family-run organization called Home on the Hill. And if you Google it, it's in Richmond, outside of Toronto. And these are families that responded to the lack of housing to come together to eventually try to open up really family-friendly supported housing. And in the meantime, they run a great education series and they have their webinars online. So Home on the Hill in Richmond, Ontario, and they've got lots of resources.
And Kathy pointed out as well some resource in Ontario.
So I know we're coming. It's so great. Sometimes we don't go to 12 o'clock, but look at all this text that's still coming in. Clearly, we have all kinds of great interests. Thank you very much. This person asks, what can we all do to help with breaking down the stigma on an individual basis? And I know that's a huge question maybe to end with, but I'm not sure if one of you would like to take that on.
Well, since everybody's being so nice, I'll be a little contentious, which is I think that it will really help genuinely break down stigma if we're honest about the severity of schizophrenia.
Absolutely.
And I sure would like these national weeks of education that only focus on people who are the stars, and in the education just basically don't educate the public about the illnesses. And also, to me, the biggest factor in stigma for people with psychotic disorders is when they are untreated. Because when the public has contact with people with untreated psychotic disorders, we can't blame them that it is upsetting for them. But to me, that kind of difficult contact is because there's a failure someplace else in the mental health system.
And I think just by having conversation, right? Acknowledging it. Like when people come to our support group, they're saying the word schizophrenia out loud, maybe for the first time, right? Because they're afraid. They don't want their family members to, be ridiculed, be ostracized, not be included, that sort of stuff. And they really, you really do feel empowered if you can say it out loud, you can speak the truth, and then you can hopefully start having small conversations with a neighbor or friend or whatever, and then so on and so on. But as I mentioned earlier with our partnership presentations, what really helps to break down the stigma is people with lived experience coming out and sharing. And they're like, wow, I had no idea you had schizophrenia. You don't look like someone who has schizophrenia. And it's like, well, what does someone with schizophrenia look like, right? Because we all have these preconceived notions.
Thank you for that. And I guess in some respects, we're talking about the answer from two different perspectives of somebody's function in some respects, right? I don't want to leave the presentation without this really important question, I think, and that'd be probably our last one. But it's, is there anywhere to help caregivers to better decipher the Mental Health Act worksheet? That sounds like a really important thing. And
decipher the Mental Health Act?
Correct, yeah.
You can find the Mental Health Act in plain language. And if people want to call me, I'm not an expert in it, but I've used it a lot and really helped advocate for families through it. So I don't mind sharing if somebody's kind of not understanding parts of it or something.
And you can just guide BC Mental Health Act Guide. And it's like a short version that whatever ministry it was or Attorney General put together so that the public can understand it. And the language is pretty clear. It's a good guide.
It's fantastic.
This is helpful too, but maybe there's a group of you that want to get together. We've heard at the beginning of this conversation that there's a group of loved ones, caregivers, family members who get together, and you make things happen. But maybe just being able to get together with a group of you to have that dialogue together. I know I learn best when I'm with people and can ask some of the same questions, and that might be a way to move forward, because I sense there is a need for just have people hashing out some of those important details. I realize it's after 12 o'clock. I know that it's your lunchtime, but I just do want to quote this last individual who talks about ways to, to get around that stigma. And they say, stand proud by your loved one. And that's
absolutely
a bloody awesome way to finish up this presentation. Again, thank you kindly, everybody, for sharing so much information and so many resources. We'll just leave the text up there for another few minutes in case you want to scroll back and copy and paste anything. When you do hear this recording or see it, the text is not really available. So just so you know that. But if you want to click out any of those links, and in Susan's presentation, she had many, many links. So you will have those for sure, because you can just use the copy of the PDF of the presentation and access them. But again, I know so many of you. We had at least 55 people on the line. We thank you kindly. Susan, this person asked, can we get a copy of the PowerPoint? So yes, that will be part of the presentation. So you can just keep scrolling through, no problem. We'll make that available to you. Thank you for being with us today. Thank you, wonderful, wonderful speakers. It was
thank you very much.
Presentation, and this is really, that's what we need to keep us going. Thank you, friendly. So with that, we will sign off. We will wish you a happy lunch and a very happy weekend. And thank you kindly.
You bet.
Thanks, Hardeep. Lovely to meet you.
You're welcome. My absolute pleasure.